It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not like this. Not now. One second I'm driving down the road, just another evening, no rush, no worries. The next, I'm being slammed sideways, my body tossed around like a rag doll, and the world goes black. I don't remember much of the crash, just the sound of metal grinding, the sharp jolt, and then a sudden stillness. I can't even recall if I screamed or if I was silent the whole time. It was all too fast, too chaotic. When I woke up, it was like my brain was struggling to catch up to my body. The first thing I felt was the weird, heavy silence. I opened my eyes, but it wasn't like how you wake up from a night's sleep. Everything felt blurry, like I was trying to focus through thick glass, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were bright lights above me and the smell of something antiseptic in the air. I couldn't move much, just a twitch here and there, and then that strange, all-consuming dizziness that wouldn't go away. Someone female, I think, spoke softly, but I couldn't make out the words right away. She was telling me something, maybe asking questions, but I couldn't answer. My mouth felt dry, like I hadn't swallowed in days. Then I realized when I tried to speak, my voice didn't come out right, like it was a half-formed whisper in my throat. Panic set in for a moment before she reassured me. "You're okay," she said, her voice warm but firm. "You've been in a car accident. Just a mild concussion. You blacked out for a bit, but you're fine now. You're in the hospital." The words felt too simple, too clean to make any sense of. A concussion? That was it? How was it possible I felt so off, so disconnected? The more I tried to focus, the more the fog in my head built. I wanted to ask questions, but all that came out was a dry cough. I tried to move my fingers, anything to get my bearings, but nothing worked. My body felt stiff and alien, and my thoughts were still scattered, like they were stuck in slow motion. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she repeated herself more slowly. "You've been out for a while, but you're safe now. Just take it easy. We'll give you some time to recover." I couldn't get a clear picture of how long I'd been here, how long I'd been unconscious, but it didn't matter at the moment. I was still too foggy, too disoriented to care. The words, mild concussion, kept playing in my mind, but they didn't sit right. Something didn't feel normal. And then something she said really stuck with me. The concussion was a bit more severe than we first thought. You may experience lapses in judgment from time to time. Things might feel a bit off, like sudden jumps, like gaps in time. It's nothing to worry about, but you should be aware of it. It's common with injuries like this. Some cases take longer to heal, and for some, the brain fog doesn't go away completely. It wasn't the kind of thing you want to hear right after a car crash. My stomach twisted at the thought. Gaps in time? Lapses in judgment? I'd had a mild concussion, but this felt different. The more I dwelled on it, the heavier it felt. What was I supposed to do with that? The next few days, or maybe it was hours, I couldn't really tell, were a blur of doctors and nurses checking in, more IV bags and machines that kept me tethered to the bed. Every time I closed my eyes, there was a strange, disjointed feeling when I opened them again. It was like nothing really lined up. One moment, the clock on the wall would say it was 3 p.m., and the next time I looked, it felt like it had jumped to 7. Was it me? Was I just misjudging time? Or was it something else? I tried to look around, but nothing seemed to settle. The room, the sounds, everything felt wrong, like the background was still moving, but I couldn't keep up with it. I'd hear a nurse outside my room, her voice muffled, but when I turned to look, no one was there. When the doctor finally came in, he explained again how everything had unfolded. How I'd been in an accident, knocked out briefly, and how the concussion would take time to heal. But then he added something that kept ringing in my head. This kind of injury can lead to some permanent effects, some long-term issues with memory, attention, things like that. The brain is resilient, but recovery takes time. You might feel a bit off for a while. I didn't really understand at the time. Off? What did that even mean? All I knew was that nothing felt right. The more I tried to focus, the more the edges of my world seemed to fade. I didn't feel like myself. And when I finally asked how long I'd been out, no one could give me a straight answer. They told me I was fine, that everything would be okay, but the words didn't match what I was feeling. The fear that something had gone wrong, something big, was growing in the back of my mind. The days in the hospital merged into one long stretch of time. It wasn't until I was finally discharged that I started to get a sense of normalcy again. At first, it felt strange to be out of that sterile, quiet place. But when I stepped out into the world again, everything felt almost like it was supposed to. Like nothing had changed, even though I knew it had. The doctors kept reassuring me that everything would be fine, that I'd make a full recovery. They warned me about the concussion, about the lapses in judgment, and the brain fog that could linger for a while. But slowly as the days passed, the fog began to clear. My body still ached, but I was able to function. I fixed my car. I went back to work. I ran errands. I did all the normal things people do, and life started to fall into place again. It wasn't immediate, but I noticed a gradual shift. I met Sarah at a coffee shop a few months later. She was sitting at a corner table, reading a book, her dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. I remember the way she smiled when I bumped into her accidentally, my nerves getting the best of me as I fumbled with the coffee in my hands. We started talking, and somehow the conversation flowed without awkward pauses. There was something calming about her presence, something easy, as if we'd known each other far longer than we actually had. Weeks turned into months. Sarah and I started seeing each other more often. It was the kind of thing you didn't overthink, just two people enjoying each other's company. But as we spent time together, I began to realize something. This was starting to feel real. She felt real. We went to dinners, took weekend trips, and after a year, I moved in with her. A year later, we were married. The timeline seemed quick in hindsight, but it felt natural. Like I'd been building this life with her for longer than I could remember. We got a house together, a small, cozy place on a quiet street. And when we found out we were expecting, it felt like everything had fallen into place. I wasn't just moving on, I was living. For the first time since the accident, it felt like the world around me had truly returned to its normal rhythm. I was growing into this life, one milestone after another. I could feel the years passing by like a gentle current, carrying me forward. We had a daughter, Lily. Holding her for the first time in the hospital room, feeling her small body in my arms, it was a moment I could never forget. The joy I felt as Sarah and I watched her grow, taking those first wobbly steps, her first word, all of it. It felt like a dream, but a good one. A life I was grateful for. A life that was real, or at least that's what I convinced myself. I kept my past, the accident, tucked away in the back of my mind. The doctors had said I'd recovered. They said there would be no lasting effects, no reason to hold on to the fear that had kept me awake in those early hospital days. But even then, there was a sense that something wasn't quite right. Not in a way I could easily put into words, but there was always something just on the edge of my awareness, something out of place. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it came back to me in fleeting moments. The strange sensations when I woke up in the morning, the odd disconnection between what I saw and what I felt. The feeling that I might have been missing something. I didn't let it consume me. I was happy. I had a family. I had a job I was proud of. But sometimes, late at night, when everything was quiet and the house settled around me, the doubts would creep back in. But I would push them away. There was no reason to dwell on them. I was here, and this was my life. The life I had worked so hard to build. The years kept going. Every now and then, when I looked at Sarah, I'd find myself wondering if we had been through all of this before in some other way. If this was a new life or something I had dreamed up to make myself feel normal again. But then I would look at our daughter or hear Sarah laugh at some silly joke I made, and all those thoughts would fade away. This was it. This was real. And it wasn't until we were on our 3rd anniversary, while Sarah and I sat outside on the porch, holding the glasses of wine, that the world began to feel alien again. The atmosphere around me felt distorted, like something had shifted just out of view. The streetlights blinked at odd intervals, and I couldn't quite figure out why. I tried to dismiss it as fatigue, but the feeling wouldn't fade, clinging to me like a second skin. I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. Something was wrong. Something didn't fit. But for the first time in a long time, I was terrified to find out what it was. I had everything I could have asked for. A family, a home, a career I was proud of. I'd found a rhythm to life that I couldn't have imagined back when I first woke up from the accident. The world had settled into a comfortable routine. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Each day felt just like the one before, but somehow that was okay. It was normal. It was the kind of normal I had wanted, the kind I had convinced myself I deserved. Lily grew up fast. One minute she was taking her first steps, and the next she was asking about school, about life beyond our little house. Sarah and I talked about her future, our future, and how we'd make sure she had everything she needed. We laughed, we argued, and we loved each other. It was the kind of life you see in movies, the kind you hear people talk about, and I was living it. I felt real. This was real, I told myself. There was no need for doubt, no need for second-guessing. I was a husband, a father, a man who had come out of a dark place and had built something good. But then there were the moments, small but growing in frequency. Little things that didn't add up, that unsettled me if I let my mind ponder on them for too long. A name I couldn't remember. A place I thought I recognized but couldn't place. Sometimes I would find myself staring at the calendar, wondering what month it was, where the time had gone. It was like there were gaps in my memory, like pieces of my life were missing. I'd ask Sarah about things, but she would just smile and assure me that everything was fine, that I was overthinking. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, and I wouldn't know why. I would lie there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was slipping into something I couldn't control. The world felt too real, but the fear was there, lurking in the shadows of my thoughts. What if this wasn't my life? What if everything around me wasn't what I thought it was? The fear of it being a dream, the same kind of fear I had when I first woke up in the hospital, had crept back into my mind, but I shoved it away. I had to, because if I didn't, I'd lose everything. We moved into a bigger house when Lily got old enough. I remember the day we signed the papers. It was a new chapter for our family. The new house was nice, with a big backyard, space for a garden, and a small office for me. I was making more money at work, so it made sense. Everything felt like it was falling into place. But every time we moved furniture into the new house, a persistent sense washed over me, like I had already walked this path. I couldn't explain it. It was like I had walked through this exact hallway, sat at that same kitchen table in some other life. The feeling was fleeting, so I pushed it aside, but it was always there. The anniversary of the accident came around again. Sarah asked if I wanted to talk about it, and I told her I was fine, that I'd put it behind me. But that wasn't entirely true. I hadn't forgotten, but I had buried it deep enough that it didn't come up in conversation. It didn't need to. I was a new man, right? The man I had become. The man I was proud of. But that night I sat alone in the dark, staring out the window, thinking about how far I had come since the accident. I still couldn't remember all the details, but I knew I had changed. I knew the life I had now wasn't the life I had before, and in a strange way I had come to accept that. But the doubts didn't stop. They kept crawling back and whispering that maybe this wasn't my life, that I was still stuck in that hospital room, still asleep, still dreaming. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, trying to push those thoughts away. I turned to Sarah, her face soft in the moonlight, and I felt the warmth of the life we had built together. This is real, I told myself. This is my life. But just as I was drifting off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard something, an odd noise, like the distant beep of machinery where it shouldn't have been. I froze, straining my ears, but nothing else came. My heart was pounding, and I realized I was wide awake, fully alert, my body stiff with tension. But the sound was gone. Had I imagined it? Had I fallen asleep and was hearing things from a dream? I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. My body felt too heavy, too sluggish, like I was trapped in a memory that wouldn't let me go. I had built a life, a real life, but there was still a nagging voice in the back of my mind, reminding me that something wasn't right, that none of this could be real. Everything is fine. This is real. I had built this life, my life. Sarah, Lily, my job, the house. We were happy. I kept saying that this was it. This was real. No more confusion. No more doubts. I had moved past the accident, moved past the hospital. I had left all that behind, hadn't I? I need to move on already. It was a lamp that finally broke me. I was sitting in the living room one evening, Lily playing in the corner, Sarah making dinner in the kitchen. It was just another normal night, the kind of night you don't think twice about. But then my gaze fell on the lamp in the corner of the room. It wasn't anything special, just a simple table lamp, a soft yellow light spilling out from underneath its shade. But something about it shifted. It was subtle, just a flicker. But then it happened again. The light didn't just flicker, it distorted. The shadow cast across the room twisted, bent in a way that didn't make sense. The lamp itself looked wrong, like it was melting into the table, as if reality itself was bending around it. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the distortion remained. The entire room seemed to warp around the lamp, like the walls were breathing in sync with the flickering light. I didn't understand it. The world around me felt too real, too solid to change like this. I began to panic. Something wasn't right. Something was terribly wrong. I stood up, my legs shaking. I reached out toward the lamp as if that would fix it, but my hand fell just short of it. The flickering light started to pulse, and the room felt like it was collapsing in on me. This wasn't real, I thought. This can't be real. I turned around to call Sarah's name, but when I looked at her, her face was also melting. She didn't look like Sarah, not the way she should have. Her eyes were distant, her smile falling off of her, like she was part of something I couldn't understand. The world was warping faster around me, everything becoming out of focus. The panic flooded my chest. I stumbled back, gasping, my mind screaming that this wasn't happening, that I was imagining it. My legs gave out, and I fell to the ground, clutching my head, as the room spun around me. And then, in an instant, everything stopped. The world didn't just fade, it snapped. The air felt cold. The warmth I'd felt in the house was gone. My body was stiff with shock, and I could feel every inch of the bed beneath me. I wasn't in the living room anymore. I wasn't in the house with Sarah and Lily. I was back in my bed, in my own room, in my house. But this wasn't the life I had just been living. This wasn't the world I had just walked through. I shot up from the bed, screaming. I didn't even know I was screaming, but I was. I looked around, desperate for something, anything, that would make sense of where I was. The room was too quiet. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what was happening. I had been in that life. I had been living that life. It was real. It had felt real. Every moment of it, every second of that life with Sarah, with Lily, felt like it was mine. It had been years, and now I was here, in this room, in this bed. Why wasn't I still there? I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop shaking. I held my head in my hands, trying to gather myself, trying to piece together what was happening. I told myself it was just a shock. I told myself that this was what the doctor had meant, that this was what they had warned me about, that the concussion had messed with my mind, that I had built this whole life as a coping mechanism, that everything I had lived through, the family, the job, the house, was just a dream that had felt too real. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the concussion. This wasn't just some foggy aftermath. This felt like a second chance, like I had lived a life, and now I was awake in this one. But that didn't make sense either, did it? Because I wasn't just waking up from an accident anymore. I was waking up from something else, something bigger. The panic and pain tore me apart. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. All I could do was sit there in my bed, in my room, sobbing uncontrollably. Eventually, I forced myself to calm down. Get a grip, I told myself. It's not real. It's just your brain trying to piece things together. But how could it be? How could everything I had lived for years suddenly be nothing? I tried to bury it. I tried to bury everything about that fake life. The memories, the feelings, the confusion. I couldn't afford to let it take over again. I had to live in the present, move forward. I had to make something out of this second chance, even if everything about it felt so unnervingly familiar. The therapy had helped, at least for a while. After the breakdown following the end of that life, I needed someone to talk to. The therapist helped me understand my anxiety, my fears, and the shock I had gone through. He told me that it was common for people in recovery to feel like they were losing grip on reality, like their sense of time and identity was fractured, that I had to rebuild my life in small, manageable steps. He told me to stop worrying about the future, to focus on each moment. But it was hard. I went through the motions, work, therapy, and eventually I met Emily. She seemed like the kind of person who could help me find my footing. She had a calm, patient energy that was the complete opposite of my frantic thoughts. We went on casual dates, laughed over coffee, talked about the future, and I tried to convince myself that this was my reality. But there were moments, flashes, where it felt like I was looking at a life I hadn't lived, like I was acting out a script. Sometimes I would sit in my apartment at night, staring at the walls, the ticking of the clock on the wall keeping me company. I could almost feel the life I had before. Sarah, Lily, the house, the routine, hovering just out of reach. When I was alone, it was easy to slip back into the feeling that nothing had truly changed. The sense of déjà vu was unbearable. It was like I was waiting for something, waiting for everything to collapse, for the world to bend, for the dream to shatter again. I had stopped seeing the therapist after a while, not because I didn't need it, but because I couldn't bear to face the truth. I had convinced myself that if I just kept moving forward, kept working and building, everything would fall into place. I didn't need to dig up old wounds anymore, but I could feel them under the surface, festering. Then the doubts came back. They were impossible to ignore. One day, I was sitting at a cafe reading a book when a woman walked in. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a ponytail, and for a moment, as she passed me, I thought it was Sarah. I blinked and the illusion vanished. It wasn't Sarah. She wasn't even close. She was just a woman who looked vaguely like her, but for that split second it had felt so real. I stared at her, trying to make sense of it, but I didn't know what to think. I couldn't explain why it affected me so much. She had reminded me of Sarah in the smallest of ways, her smile, the way she moved, the way she held her coffee cup. But it was nothing more than a simple resemblance. I tried to brush it aside, but it stayed with me. The thought didn't leave me for days, and then another woman, a different one, had a similar effect. The same smile, the same posture, the same eyes that felt like they belonged to someone I had known forever. I could feel the panic creeping up, the same anxiety I had felt after I woke up from that nightmare. I wasn't just seeing Sarah in these women. I was seeing everything I had lost. I was seeing a version of a life that I had built and then had it taken away. I tried to tell Emily about it, about these strange moments, but the words wouldn't come out right. She looked at me with concern, as if she could see the fear in my eyes. "You're just stressed," she said one night, pulling me into her arms, trying to calm me. "You've been through a lot, but you're here now. You're safe." But I didn't feel safe. Not at all. I could hear her voice, but in the back of my mind, the doubts were louder. The fear of losing another life. The fear that this, too, was just another dream. I might as well have just been in a mental asylum. Time went on, and I kept building. I kept pushing forward. I moved into a better apartment, signed up for a few hobby classes to meet new people, tried to keep my mind from wandering back to the things I didn't want to face. I forced myself to let go of the past, to forget the fake life and focus on the future. Emily and I traveled to the coast one weekend, stayed in a cabin near the beach. It was supposed to be the kind of weekend that erased all the doubts. But the moment I saw the ocean, I felt that familiar sense of wrongness creep back in. The waves crashed against the shore, but for a second, it felt like I had been here before. It was as if this moment, this very feeling, had been lived through once already. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it, again. I woke up early the next morning, walking down to the beach to clear my head. The salty air hit me with a mix of comfort and dread. As I walked along the sand, I couldn't help but look at the waves and wonder if this was my life, or if it was just a continuation of something I was trying to outrun. Eventually, Emily found me standing by the water, her footsteps soft on the sand behind me. "James?" Her voice was gentle, but there was a hint of worry there, as if she could sense the turmoil beneath my calm demeanor. "I'm fine," I said quickly, turning to her with a forced smile. "Just thinking." But deep down, I knew I wasn't fine. The pain won't go away. It's a permanent scar. I wanted to believe that this life was mine, that I had built it from scratch. But the doubts kept growing. Every time I looked at Emily, I could see flashes of the past, echoes of a life I'd left behind. Every time I thought I had left it all behind, I found myself sinking back into the same spiral. And the more I built this life, the more it felt like I was still trying to wake up. It happened slowly at first. A smell here, a sound there. I thought I was imagining things, but the strange sensations persisted. I had just stepped into a small bakery one morning, the sweet smell of fresh bread in the air, when the faintest whiff of something else hit me. Sterile, clinical, like the smell of disinfectant. It wasn't strong, but it was there, just beneath the warm, yeasty scent. My heart rate spiked. I paused, glancing around, expecting to see a nurse or a medical staff member, but there was nothing. Just the baker behind the counter, preparing the pastries. I left quickly. I had to. Otherwise, I knew I would start falling apart. But it kept happening. Over the next few days, I'd pass stores, cafes, even public bathrooms, and that same sterile, hospital-like scent would sneak up on me. Sometimes it would be mingled with other smells like coffee or food, but it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. And then there were the machine beeps, the mechanical beep that seemed to come out of nowhere. I heard it at a cafe, at the grocery store, even in my own apartment, though I knew there were no machines around. The beeping started quietly, a soft sound that seemed to come from nowhere. Then it would stop suddenly, leaving me disoriented and unsettled. I'd glance around looking for the source, but no one else seemed to notice. The moments were so brief, so disorienting, that I thought I was losing my mind. The next time it happened, I was driving on a quiet road with no music. It finally overwhelmed me, pushing me to my breaking point, and I started having a panic attack, ultimately losing consciousness. The moment I fully realized what had happened came when I was sitting in a quiet room at the hospital. I had been drifting in and out of a strange, half-conscious state, but I was aware enough to see the doctor and nurse sitting across from me. "James," the doctor said gently, as though explaining something to a child, "you've been in a coma for 13 years. You were in an accident, and your body was unresponsive for a long time. It's been a long recovery." All I could do was sit in silence. 13 years. 13 years of nothing, of dreams, of fake lives. I couldn't process it. My mouth went dry as the words sank in. How could I have been unconscious for so long? And if I had been in a coma, then what had I just experienced? The life I had built, the one with Emily, the job, the apartment. None of it had been real. It had all been another dream, just like the first. And now I was being told it was all just a cruel continuation of my own mind's need to cope. The doctor continued explaining. "Your body's been through a lot, James. The therapy will help you regain muscle strength, and you'll need to work on speech and motor skills. You've lost a lot of time, but we're here to help you get back on track. It'll take time, but we believe you can make a full recovery." Full recovery? How could I make a full recovery from something that wasn't real? My mind was reeling, but I tried to hold it together. I was led to a therapy room later that day. The physical therapist started by gently moving my arms and legs, guiding them through basic motions as I lay there. It felt like I was in someone else's body, unfamiliar and foreign. But the therapist was patient. She kept reassuring me that I was doing well, that my body was responding. But it didn't feel like it. It felt like I was learning to walk again, learning to use my body again. Next, I started speech therapy. The words came slowly, but they came. I tried to form sentences to express myself, but it was like trying to pull words from a dark, distant place. They wouldn't come easily. I had to focus, to remember how to speak. It was also overwhelming. I was told that I would need to be monitored for my mental health, that the trauma of my coma and everything I had been through could have long-lasting effects. So they put me on suicide watch. It was for my own safety, they said. I didn't argue. At this point, I didn't care enough to argue. They were smart to do it, because if there had been any opportunity for me to end all right then and there, I would have. I just wanted the confusion to stop. I wanted to know if I was still dreaming, if everything was still a lie. Was this real? Was I awake? My parents came to visit, sitting beside my bed in that sterile, quiet room. They spoke to me like everything was fine, like the years didn't matter. But I could see the worry in their eyes, the fear. They had lost so much time with me, too, and I could see that they were terrified of what I would be like now that I was awake. I didn't know how to make them understand what I had been through. How could I explain that none of this felt real, that everything I had just experienced, the life I had been building, it wasn't real? And then came the moment when I thought I might just go insane. I was sitting in my room late one night, looking out the window at the city lights, when I heard that beeping again. It wasn't coming from a machine nearby, it was in my mind. I could hear it as clearly as if it was right next to me. The sound echoed through the walls, and it felt like it was coming from deep within my mind, drawing me back into that familiar, suffocating sense of confusion. The room felt too small. The lights felt too bright. I was losing grip. The nurses and doctors came in the next morning. They told me I needed rest. They told me I needed to calm down, that it was just part of the recovery process. They gave me a small toy, a fidget spinner, something to keep my hands busy to focus on. It was a simple tool, something small to help manage the anxiety and the uncertainty. I didn't know why they thought it would help, but as I sat there, spinning the small, colorful toy in my hands, I couldn't help but stare at it. It spun and spun, perfectly balanced. I played with it for hours, and for a moment, I could almost believe that it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. I stopped it with my finger, and it immediately came to a halt, as I expected. It felt real. The stillness of it, the weight of the moment, the way it sat in my hand, it was exactly what I needed. But then I spun it again and placed it on the table, watching how long it would spin. The spinner continued, spinning effortlessly. At first I was amused. It spun and spun, longer than I expected. I watched, fascinated, as it kept going, slowing, but never quite stopping. I glanced at the clock. It had been several minutes, and it was still spinning. It shouldn't have kept going. It didn't make sense. I knew how long it had been spinning. This seemed oddly impossible. I waited for it to slow down completely, to come to a stop. But it didn't. It just kept going. A faint wobble, yes, but it was still moving. I stared at it. The more I looked at it, the more I felt that all too familiar sensation. The longer it spun, the more I questioned everything. Was I awake? Was this real? Was I still stuck in some endless dream just like before? It finally slowed down, coming to a near stop, but the sensation of dread stayed with me. The room felt too quiet, too still, and yet the spinner's motion was all I could focus on. I stared at the ceiling for a while, drifting in and out of sleep, but I could still hear it. It was still spinning, and I couldn't bring myself to look. Was this my reality, or was this just another dream?